Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and, well, you might be winning the podcast today, but that doesn't mean you'll be winning it tomorrow. I, on the other hand, might be on the downside of the podcast today, but tomorrow I could come right on up.
Jason is nailing his audition for the latest stage revival of The Little Foxes.
I was so fascinated by that characterization and so many of them in here. I thought Charles Dingle, I mean, obviously we know Bette Davis, all-time legend. Charles Dingle absolutely slaughtered this role that he played there.
A lot of great performances in this film from actors who are not necessarily nearly as well known as Bette Davis, who was the subject of our audience choice poll for our season on the films of 1941. As always, we end the season by giving you, our listeners, the choice among a few different films with a little theme. For this year, it was the films of Bette Davis from 1941, including The Little Foxes, our winner. Other choices were The Bride Came COD and The Great Lie. And not a ton of participation in this poll, I have to admit.
That's okay. Josh, I'm going to spin this in the positive for you. Okay. So, sometimes the audience choice, I say to myself, what are you guys, idiots? Are you dumb fucks? What are you, stupid? You can't be that stupid. You listen to our podcast. You got to be dummies. But this time I was like, hey, you guys came through and you crushed it and we love you. And I won't let Josh say anything negative about you.
No. Thank you very much to the 3 people who voted for The Little Foxes.
You could leave that part out, Josh.
I agree with you, though, that this is definitely the best choice. I have seen all 3 of these films, and this is easily the best of those choices. I love Bette Davis, and I would have been happy to talk about her in any context, and maybe revisiting one of those other 2, I would have liked it a little more than I did the first time. But definitely I was happy to watch this film again. And thank you to the vast number of supporters of this film in our poll. We always appreciate the members of the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces Facebook group, which is where our polls have been living recently, for their participation. And this is where we've ended up with The Little Foxes.
And Josh, I mean, I feel like I've redeemed myself after a year knocking my impressions on the Philadelphia story. I think my Charles Dingle came out pretty good there. So.
Yeah, I think so. I think, as we've discussed, you
like the lesser, yeah.
Right. Well, I feel like you're able to really hone in on some of these distinctive supporting players or just obscure figures in the films that we talk about, and it amuses me. I like it.
Well, anything that might make me money, obviously, I have no interest in. So all these things that are just on the fringe and have nothing but possible party tricks, I'm all in for. So.
Well, I have to say that even if you had done the world's greatest Cary Grant impression, I don't know that that's making you a lot of money in 2025.
Well, I say that's a ridiculous statement.
And you are not doing the world's greatest Cary Grant impression.
Not even close.
Fair enough. Hey, but, I got to say, Josh is underselling himself, Dave. He's like, I've seen each of these movies before. As I said, Josh, the foremost expert on Bette Davis in the world. He's seen over 80 Bette Davis movies.
Jason is getting very worked up over this fact. And I'm certainly not the foremost Bette Davis expert in the world. I am, however, a big Bette Davis fan. She is certainly my favorite actor. And I have seen, 82 Bette Davis movies, easily the most of any actor in existence. And I love Bette Davis. There's a lot of really bad Bette Davis movies. I mean, I think she's always entertaining to watch, but I would not necessarily recommend you watch all 82 of those movies.
I mean, the fact that you've watched so many, I mean, you got to go in a little more detail here. Obviously, you said she's your favorite, but watching 80 movies of anybody, it's a little more than just a favorite. There has to be a deeper reason than that, right?
Well, I mean, I think first, she was very prolific. And so you see an actor or a filmmaker, you see a movie and you think, wow, this person is great. I want to check out what they've done. Not everyone has that many things to check out. So I think that's part of it, is that she had a long, long career and worked very steadily, especially in the 1930s and the 1940s, this period. Obviously, she made 3 movies in 1941. That was why we were able to have this poll. So, I mean, I think that's part of it. And really the main thing was there was a period of time on my blog at joshbellhateseverything.com where I was trying to do these kind of longer term projects, and I did focuses on various themes. And so one month I did like Bette Davis month and wrote about 30 or 31 or whatever Bette Davis movies in a single month. And so that right there is a huge number. And then I just kind of kept going because I really enjoyed her. And whenever there was a Bette Davis movie on TCM or something that was available to watch that I hadn't seen before, I tried to kind of fill in the rest of the gaps just because I was getting closer and closer. And it was always enjoyable. Again, there's a lot of bad movies, but she's always good to watch. I've seen some of her TV guest appearances. You know, I saw an episode of The Virginian that she was on, and Wagon Train. And yeah, not great necessarily, but she's always just a joy to watch. So I think that was it. It was mainly that one big project that was like 15 years ago or something that kind of sparked it all.
The only person that Dave's seen 80s movies of is
did you have a joke there, or were you just
going to say Jim Varney? Jim Varney is what you were trying to think of? Yeah.
Ernest or who? 80 movies. So, yeah.
I like that you just were hoping it would come to you as you were speaking.
I was mixing up names. I was going to throw in obscure porn stars, but who would have gone for that? So, you know,
yeah.
So. And Dave can tell us about the Ernest porno at another time. So.
Yeah, we'll get there eventually.
Ernest comes clean.
I don't know how we suddenly got from there to Ernest porno so quickly.
That's the beauty of the podcast and why 3 people voted in our polls.
5 people voted. 3 of them voted for this movie. So come on.
Yeah.
Give us a little more credit.
Anyway, it's all good because we got to see a rad Bette Davis movie. So.
We did. And always with this feature that we do, whatever the audience chooses, we'll get to see something interesting and talk about it. And because we've chosen beforehand for the options, so we are going to offer the audience something that we're going to be interested in talking about. So, but Jason, I know you, your mom was a huge Bette Davis fan as well.
Yeah. So we're recording this a few days after Mother's Day, and I obviously, you know, we all know who Bette Davis is, but I never really got into her stuff. And I watched this and I was like, yeah, I'm in. So on Mother's, when we were growing up, we had a framed poster of Now Voyager, which was like one of my mom's favorites. So on Mother's Day, late at night, I put that one on, and that was a nice way to honor my mom. And making my way through All About Eve right now, and excited to watch more, because while I am in no way on the Bellsian wavelength of this, she's such a unique and interesting performer, and just like so emotive with her face beyond everything. And I really just dug into that.
Yeah, she is fantastic. And I was glad to revisit this because, like I said, the bulk of the movies that I saw, Bette Davis movies that I saw, were all in this one short time period. So I love her, and I saw so many of her movies, but not that much recently. So it was great to revisit this. I've revisited a handful of others for articles or other reasons, but not at the pace that I was watching them for a brief period of time in, like, you know, the early 2010s or whatever. So it was great to look back at this film. And this was a very popular film, not only among Awesome Movie Year voters, but in general. It was adapted from the 1939 play by Lillian Hellman, who also wrote the screenplay for the film. That play ran for 410 performances and starred Tallulah Bankhead in the main role that Bette Davis plays here of Regina, the not matriarch, I guess that's not the right word, but sort of the figurehead of this horrible family in early 1900s. I guess they just say the Deep South. Do we get exactly where this is located?
No, we don't. But I mispronounced his name. Charles Dingle is the brother, not Dangle, Lieutenant Dangle there. So you have this like kind of like old boss daddy figure, right? And You have Regina and then her husband who's sick and has his own money. And then you have another brother, Oscar, who's like just trying to get his son to like connive and do unsavory things to like get their part of the money. I know we're just getting into the intro, but you mentioned Lillian Hellman. It all starts with her. She did such a great job of creating characters, motivations, and conflicts that play throughout this whole thing.
Right. And the central idea here is that these three siblings are trying to orchestrate a deal to bring a cotton mill to their town, wherever exactly that it is, that will make them a lot of money. And they're all scheming to screw each other over, as well as screw over basically anyone who comes into contact with them. And,
it fits what's going on in the country today. The rich are just trying to fuck everybody. And I'm sorry, that's just how it is right now.
No, it's true. And I think this remains quite timely, even though it is 80 plus years old and it took place even, 125 years ago. I'm sure it was relevant then, even though it took place in the past, and it's just as relevant now. And it was a big success on Broadway, and as it was transferred to film, a number of the actors from the Broadway version appear in the film, not Tallulah Bankhead, of course, who was replaced by Bette Davis, but Charles Dingle, who you mentioned, as well as Patricia Colling, who was nominated for an Oscar, Dan Duryea, John Marriott, and Carl Benton Reid all reprised their roles from the play in this film from director William Wyler. It was nominated for 9 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress for Bette Davis, Best Supporting Actress for both Patricia Colling and Teresa Wright, who plays Bette Davis's daughter, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Black and White Art Direction, Best Editing, and Best Original Score. It won none of those awards, which at the time was a record for most nominations without winning anything.
What a year for Greg Toland, the cinematographer, between this and Citizen Kane, making 2 classics and Hollywood just saying, fuck you.
Yeah, he was not nominated for this one, actually.
I mean, I think, you talked about kind of the art direction and that nomination, but most of this takes place on a sprawling manor. And we know that this guy is as good as it gets with shooting that stuff. Like the space is always used well. You don't ever feel like you do feel like the size and scope of it. And he's always just doing interesting things. So, even though Hollywood and the Academy didn't recognize him, we here at Awesome Movie Year do.
And that's what really counts. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a tendency still for movies based on plays like this to, especially non-musical plays, to feel confined and stagey. And this doesn't feel that way. There are multiple moments in this movie where just the blocking, just the arrangement of characters in the frame, I thought was just so impressive and so effectively captured like the theme or emotion of a moment just in the way that the characters are placed alongside each other. And maybe some of that's Wyler and maybe some of that's Toland, and it's really them working together. But it makes this movie visually striking, even if it's just within this handful of rooms for the most part.
Can you give us an example of one of those shots, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, at one point later in the film, when Regina is kind of experiencing a moment of triumph over her 2 brothers, and she's lounging sort of on this couch or whatever, and you see her, she's large, she's in the foreground, and the brothers are, and as well as the nephew, I believe, played by Darren Duryea, are standing behind her, and they're all arranged in a row with her in the middle, and it's like she's just looming in front of them because she has now defeated them in this moment. And it's not distracting in any way. But it just is, it's exactly what that moment is about.
It's interesting, 1941, this is like, we look for themes, but I think we're really getting to the highest level of staging things. We've talked about this with ornamental hairpin, with like stuff in the foreground while there's background action. We've talked about this with Citizen Kane, where it's like, oh, there's a parrot, and now the parrot left, and now that we're into the scene. So I think, we know that this is often considered the greatest movie year, and I like to think of it as 75 New Hollywood, but I think there's so many parallels to people, heightening their art and taking chances.
Yeah, this is incredibly impressive. And the other theme that this kind of goes to is this is the third movie we've talked about that was based on a massive hit stage play that, for what we can tell, I think that we have to varying degrees liked and, has been able to capture the success, whether it was the Philadelphia Story or Hell's a Poppin' or now this, and translate what made that play so successful and so popular into a film that was equally successful and popular.
Yeah, using the space. I think I've mentioned it before, but like something of the last century, of this century, like Mike Nichols' Closer, which mostly takes place in an apartment. I was so impressed with the way, it's based on a play. It's mostly in an apartment, and the way he utilizes that space is really incredible. So I like watching stuff like that. Of those Broadway actors, Josh, who reprised their role in this, Dingle, Carl Benton Reid, Dan Duryea, and Patricia Collins were all in the play. And then there's a whole background on the Tallulah Bankhead thing where Bette Davis is on record as saying Tallulah, as she said, on Little Foxes, I begged the producer Samuel Goldwyn to let Tallulah Bankhead play Regina because Tallulah was magnificent on stage. He wouldn't let her. Miriam Hopkins was the other name, but Wyler refused to work with her. He wanted Bette Davis if they weren't going to get Tallulah because they obviously had this relationship and worked together before. And then there's this whole other side story about how Davis created this character. On the one side, people say, well, she saw Bankhead and that character was so unique. And, the way she played it as kind of a victim, just trying to come up and fight the patriarchy, so to speak here, that Davis went the opposite way, played it cold, calculating, and kind of on a level playing field. But then other people say she basically mimicked the performance. I have, as you know, I'm on record as saying I saw no plays in the 30s and 40s, so I can't say for sure. But it's all this interesting background. We know Davis was a perfectionist and worked very hard on her characterizations and craft. So, Josh, as the foremost leading expert on Bette Davis, where do you stand on this?
Well, obviously, I also can't say what the performance was like on stage from Tallulah Bankhead. And definitely, if there was an approach to this character as being more of a victim and lashing out because of oppression, that is toned down here. Although I think you can absolutely still read the character that way, that like Regina is evil and cold and heartless and everything. But at the same time, the world she's living in is one where that's maybe the only way for a woman to achieve some level of independence or success, because she's beholden to the men in her life, whether that's her husband or her brothers. So, I mean, I think there is still some of that there. I do think that William Wyler is the best collaborator for Bette Davis as far as directors go. I mean, the other films they made together, Jezebel and The Letter, are both excellent. The Letter is maybe my favorite Bette Davis movie, or it's certainly up there along with this one. So I think as far as the casting goes, him insisting on having her in the film was the right choice.
And where do you put The Letter in your ranking of Joe Cocker songs?
You know what? I have to say I don't know that Joe Cocker song.
Really? My Baby Wrote Me a Letter. It's a great song. He does a great version. It's like a early 60s, late 50s song, and he redoes it in like a very Joe Cocker theatrical way. I'll send it to you today. You'll like it, Josh.
Oh, good. I look forward to that.
Getting back to this whole thing with Wyler and Davis, she called him her like most cherished director, and they were at loggerheads this whole production. They fought constantly to the point where they never worked together again.
Yeah, which is a shame because, like I said, those other collaborations are both excellent. And obviously, she's made a lot of great movies and she worked with other great directors. And he made great movies with other actors. But I feel like they had a certain special kind of collaboration that brought out the best in both of them.
We talked about Wyler on Wuthering Heights and what a great craftsman he was there. Obviously a legend. So it's nice to see more stuff from him.
Yeah. I've seen a number of his films. And I mean, he's obviously, we'll talk about it more maybe a little later, but he certainly made quite a few very famous classic films. But I think their collaboration is something special. So this movie did well at the box office. It grossed $2.2 million, which is impressive for 1941, although allegedly it lost $140,000 for the studio based
allegedly.
some
accounting.
Accounting, exactly. So I think this is, however, can be qualified as a success, and critics were positive about it as well. Bosley Crowther in the New York Times said, Lillian Hellman's grim and malignant melodrama, The Little Foxes, has now been translated to the screen with all its original viciousness intact, and with such extra added virulence as the relentless camera of director William Wyler and the tensile acting of Bette Davis could impart. The Little Foxes leaps to the front as the most bitingly sinister picture of the year, and as one of the most cruelly realistic character studies yet shown on the screen. With a perfect knowledge of the camera's flexibility, the author and Mr. Wyler have derived out of the play a taut and cumulative screen story which exhales the creepy odor of decay and freezes charitable blood with the deliberation of a frigid air.
That is one of the interesting things, and we've kind of talked about this in Gone with the Wind, like this kind of trying to hold on to something that's not there, or trying to build something up that's dying. And I think this is a family that's willing to destroy everyone else to get what they need, other than Horace, the dying husband of Regina. And it's so many movies of this time period, I reference now Voyager, are about status and keeping your status, right? So I think you see a lot of that in this film.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting you mentioned Gone with the Wind, which of course is very nostalgic for the antebellum South in ways that are problematic. And in some ways this movie is as well, because one of the most sympathetic characters is Patricia Collins' character, Bertie, who is also nostalgic for that era. She comes from the old money plantation owning family, and the Hubbards are the villains, and they weren't slave owners. They were these kind of upstarts who swooped in after the war and took the plantation after it was no longer financially viable because of emancipation. And that is regarded as bad and evil, and Bertie's nostalgia for that era is sympathetic. And I think it's complicated there because, I mean, it's true that these people basically destroyed Bertie's family legacy or whatever and took her home. But at the same time, there's a bit of Gone with the Wind ickiness to that.
So it's the 2 points on that. From the Bertie character, what I took was that she's nostalgic for it because her family didn't treat her like garbage like this family does, and like really just destroyed her life and just treated her terribly, right? The other side of that is obviously the comparisons that we will make to the Black help in this film. Even though it's 1900 and they're not slaves, I would say while they are often given compassion, they're not treated as per se intelligent characters very often in this film.
That is true. And obviously that's a legacy of, I mean, this is an era in 1900 where almost all of these characters would remember the pre-Civil War era and have experienced that. And so that colors their reactions and their interactions with those servants who, yes, are not slaves, but are certainly not in any way treated equally as human beings. So, I mean, I think part of it, though, is just the way that it shows that everyone here is problematic. No one here is unequivocally good or sympathetic, as much as Bertie is more sympathetic than the Hubbards, who are just straight up evil.
Yeah, the sympathetic characters are Horace, the dying husband.
Yes.
The daughter and her suitor, David, the young people who are figuring out the new world, right? And it's kind of interesting that those are the ones who are like, hey, we have to look at this a different way. Meanwhile, you have that mirror with Leo, the nephew, who's just a scumbag, who's also of that age. And Oscar is trying to marry off Leo to his first cousin, who's Regina's daughter. And there's a lot, like I said, this is just full of like webs and conflicts and, kind of threads that you can play along with through the whole movie. So it really, I think Lillian Hellman, I don't remember if you said if she was nominated, but she should have been for this film.
Yeah, she was. The screenplay was nominated for an Oscar, and I certainly agree with you.
Lost to that little loser movie, Citizen Kane, right?
Well, that would have been that's best original screenplay. So
this is adapted.
This is adapted, yeah. So I'm not sure who this one lost to,
but Josh, she did have other people writing on this, not just herself, right? It was Dorothy Parker and some Algonquin Roundtable members who did like additional dialogue, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, she is. It's credited, yes, as just like additional writing or whatever. And looking right now at the Oscars, she was the only one who got the nomination, not those other writers. And the winning film was Here Comes Mr. Jordan, which I have not seen. But How Green Was My Valley and The Maltese Falcon, a couple of movies that we've talked about this season, were also nominated in that category.
Hey, that's cool. We've talked about those. So.
We sure did. So speaking of outdated attitudes, Variety used some outdated language in their review. They said, from starring Bette Davis down the line to the bit roles portrayed by minor Negroes, the acting is well nigh flawless. And standing out sharply in Lillian Hellman's searing play about rapacious people are several performers who appeared in the 1939 Broadway stage version. The story is about the Hubbard family of the Deep South, as mercenary a foursome as has never emerged from fact or fiction. Herbert Marshall turns in one of his top performances in the exacting portrayal of a suffering, dying man. On top of the smooth pace, William Wyler has handled every detail with an acutely dramatic touch.
So just to get back to what I was saying there, Josh, the additional dialogue was with Hellman's ex-husband, Arthur Kober, Dorothy Parker, and her husband, Alan Campbell. Herbert Marshall, when I was doing my research, he lost a leg in World War I, and you would never know that by the way that he moves around in this film. So good on them.
Yeah, I mean, he is like, often seated. I mean, his character is sick and weak, so he often isn't walking around a lot here. But I mean, we do have that horrifying scene where he's like crawling his way up the stairs, slowly dying as Regina just sits there with the expressions. You're talking about Bette Davis's face, the various expressions sort of playing out on her face as she thinks about what she's doing, allowing her husband to die. And I mean, that's a great moment for her, but it's a great moment for him and a great moment for Greg Toland, because again, you have that close up of Bette Davis's face in the foreground, and then this sort of out of focus background where you see him attempting to crawl up the stairs and cry for help. And it's just wonderfully done. But he's more understated here than she is, but also a very, very good performance. And he has to play, I think it's in a way maybe easier to get that attention by playing a terrible person than it is. I mean, he's playing the like saintly suffering guy, and that's tougher maybe to bring range to, but he does a very good job of it.
That sequence is the most memorable sequence in the movie, and one of the most memorable scenes I've ever seen on film. Like, it burns in your brain. They have that swelling music, and you see this man just trying to get to his medicine. And Bette Davis, you can see all these emotions going on in her face. It's like that's filmmaking, baby.
That is. So we kind of talked about this already, but Jason, you were new to Bette Davis and new to this film.
What an idiot I am, Josh.
Hey, we all have our things that's what's great about Awesome Movie Year. We're all getting to get to discover new films, new filmmakers, new stars, etc. And like I said, I was happy to get to revisit this. And I wish I had intended before we were doing this episode, I had thought, I'm going to rewatch this film and this film and this film, because I would love to rewatch The Letter or Jezebel, the William Wyler collaborations or some other things. And unfortunately, I did not get around to that, but I was happy to watch The Little Foxes. Dave, had you seen this before?
I had not. I'm trying to think if I've seen anything other than Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which Jason brought up the mom connection earlier. That's one of my mom's favorite movies. And I think we watched that on a birthday or a Mother's Day or something like that together.
Yeah, that's one that I should revisit too, because that was one of the first Bette Davis movies I saw. And that's so over the top and so campy. And I think I was a little put off by it. And I've
Mm,
seen much more of her late period campy stuff now, and I think maybe I would appreciate it a little more if I watched it again, but it's not among my favorites at this point.
mm.
Anything else you want to say about the background of this film, Jason?
I think we covered the whole movie already.
We did cover a lot, but we'll come back and talk a little more of our general thoughts on The Little Foxes. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1941, we are talking about the audience choice pick, The Little Foxes, starring Bette Davis. And we have talked a lot about this film already and our favorite elements from this film. Jason, is there any other specific moment or aspect to this film that really stood out to you that you want to mention?
I think the Charles Dingle character, the Uncle Ben, who never raises his voice. He is clearly motivated by, let's say, forces of evil there, but he's such a smooth operator. And even when he's beat, he knows to like take the L and go for the W the next day. So to me, the kind of interplay with, you know, how smooth he is, whereas how gruff she is, worked for me really well. And I was just so impressed. You know, we've seen this a few times this season with you know, Maltese Falcon and the big man there. Like some really, really great, unique supporting performances.
Yeah, Sidney Greenstreet in the Maltese Falcon is fantastic. And I mean, we talked about him in that film, that it was a breakout and he went on to be a bigger star and appear in a lot of roles. And I mean, I think Charles Dingle remained more of a character actor, but still, like that, all of the acting is very good in this film. I think this is known as a Bette Davis film, and she's certainly the most famous actor in it and is fantastic. But I was reminded watching it again this time that this is really an ensemble film. There are a lot of scenes that she isn't in, and they're just as fascinating to watch. And I do think that sibling dynamic is really effective because it's not just, oh, they're all evil and they're all conniving in the same way. They are all evil and they're all conniving, but all in different ways. And like you said, Ben has this kind of jovial presence where he maybe disarms people by seeming friendly and open, but then he's going to screw them over just as badly as anyone else. And then you have the other brother, Oscar, who is kind of less clever, right? In a way, he's not as devious. He's a bit more straightforward about just like, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to fuck people up or whatever. And Regina always calculating and always one step ahead of everyone else. And yet they're at odds with each other, but yet they can make this very formidable team too. You can get the sense that they've gotten to where they are at the beginning of the film because they have helped each other and collaborated with their own self-interests in mind.
Yeah, I was looking up, you know, the kind of background on the term, the little foxes, and it's like a family that is well off, but not as rich as they want to be. So they're going to do what it takes to get to that elite level. And I think obviously that's so apropos for this. So Josh, to point out scenes where we're seeing that kind of play. At the beginning of the movie, there's this dinner party for the, investor from Chicago, right? And Bertie and Regina's daughter are supposed to do a piano number, and that's like the big entertainment. And the brothers are so terrible in that scene as Mr. Marshall's like really just being, if at the very least polite, at the very most interested in hearing them. And Oscar is, berating her in it. And Ben is just like stirring his drink really loudly, just asshole moves all the way around as these two women are just trying to, give them the night's entertainment. And that's what I mean. Like, I feel like all these characters are so well drawn and their motivations and actions are so clear as to why they're doing it. I was so impressed with the screenplay of this thing.
Yeah. And I think it takes a little while, maybe, if you don't know what to expect, to realize how terrible these people are. Because the movie opens And, they all live in this sort of like, I don't know if it's like around a courtyard or like a cul-de-sac or something, but they're all living next door to each other. And you have the beginning of the movie where there's Teresa Wright, and she's in this carriage and she's arriving, and there's Uncle Ben kind of popping his head out the window, and there's Bertie. And it's like, oh, it's this nice family dynamic, and here's everybody cozy together. And you have to realize over the course of maybe the early scenes that no, this is not what this is at all. These people are awful, and they mostly hate each other, and they're trying to sabotage each other. And I think there's an expectation of that kind of nostalgic Old South tone that is subverted here in an impressive way.
Right. There's that whole like, there's the in the South, like sometimes when they compliment you, they're insulting you. Like, isn't he precious or something like that?
Bless his heart.
Exactly. My friend Steven Roberts, who's a great comedian who's from Texas, does a joke about how when a Southern woman says bless your heart, they're really saying fuck off or whatever. So, but you bring up a good point because like, the beginning there, oh, you're going to sing us a song tonight? Wow, that's going to be wonderful. And like, everyone is so nice to each other. And the only city I've been where I've seen like kind of like geographical layouts where it's like you said, it's a courtyard, but there are all these like kind of, interconnected family homes is New Orleans. And I'm not saying this took place there, but it does have that kind of regal Southern flair of something like that. So it does take a little while because even with the Regina character, obviously she's Bette Davis, she commands the screen. You're rooting for her at first until you get to know her more. And you're like, man, she's a big asshole too.
Right. And I think you root for her in part because of what we were talking about earlier, the idea that during this period that she is constrained by the patriarchy, that in order to assert her independence or her own agency, she's fighting against all these forces. And that includes her brothers. And maybe that includes her husband, who we don't see for a long time. We just mention that he's away somewhere. And so we don't know exactly what kind of person he is necessarily until he shows up in the second part of the film. So I do think we're inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt, at least for a little while. And even as terrible as she is, I think you can take that into account, that this is maybe the only way that she's able to secure herself a position, or what she thinks of as securing a future for her daughter, which of course the daughter will entirely reject, and reasonably so. But you can understand those motivations even if she's doing awful things.
Yeah, you're saying, is she fighting against her husband? Yes, but her husband seems to be the good guy, and she's letting him die and like saying terrible things to him and like manipulating him. So I'm not going to give her as much as the benefit of the doubt. Like even this idea of like, this is the only way she can survive. They're well off. They're not poor, right? Like they'll survive no matter what. And even if the brothers are breadcrumbing her, like they'll be fine. Right. So it's so much of a power grab and wanting the most power more than like, this is my only way of survival, I think.
Right. No, you're right. What I'm saying is you give her the benefit of the doubt, or you're inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt at first.
Right.
Because of the position that she's in. And I think you can see how that position is a sort of starting point for what she feels that she needs to do. But obviously, yes, she takes it further than is reasonable. And the other thing is, once you do get to know the husband, you realize that he is the good guy and that he is very much trying to secure a future for the daughter. That this is not the only way for her to have security. Right. That he will provide for her. He would never think to leave her in the lurch, and he wouldn't marry her off to some guy that she, to Leo, the cousin.
Her cousin.
Right.
Yeah,
or anyone where it would simply be for the advantage of the family rather than for something that she herself wants. That's just not the kind of person he is. But we don't know that early on.
And that's an interesting character, the daughter character right there, right? Because she is growing up. She's a teenager who already cares about status and how everything. This is Teresa Wright, who played Zanny Alexandra. So, and the more that she talks to her dad or talks to David, her, would-be suitor that she is into, it's seemingly more at first she's more into him than he her, but you get that kind of equality of love towards the end. But she has to learn, hey, this is how my family works, and do I or do I not want to be a part of it? And that's what helps make the ending so effective as well.
Yeah, and weirdly, a character that I think of when I think of her is Michael Corleone from The Godfather,
I understand that.
It's like, do you embrace the awfulness of your family, potentially to your advantage in terms of money and power, or do you reject it? And I think here, she goes, although we can't say for sure, but she goes the opposite direction of Michael Corleone here at the end. And she seems to have rejected the power that Regina is offering her, and she's going off with the suitor. It was interesting to me too that apparently that whole subplot with her and David was added for the movie and is not in the play. And it seems pretty crucial to the themes in terms of the generational differences and in terms of being able to break the cycle of awfulness of the family.
David's an interesting character too. If he wasn't as fleshed out or even in the play, he really did add a lot in that, at one point, Regina said, are you courting my daughter? And he said, I'm not. But if I was, it wouldn't matter to me if you approved or not, which is a ballsy thing to say to a society woman at that point in time. And I kind of liked, obviously someone's got to be like the moral center, whether it's him or, kind of the Horace. But I kind of like that he wasn't just he had morals, but he was also willing to stand up and not just kind of boohoo in the corner, woe is me type.
Right. And he doesn't have the status. I mean, we see his mother is like a seamstress. She's always hemming and fixing up Regina's dresses. And he himself is a writer. I guess he writes for the newspaper, but he's also writing his own. I don't know what exactly we never really find out the specifics of it, but he's kind of off in his own little world, right? We have the whole sequence where he wants to see Zanny off at the train station and he runs out in his pajamas and all this stuff. But I did find him interesting too, because I feel like just like everyone else, just like the terrible people where you can kind of understand some of their motivations, he's not purely good either. He's really kind of a condescending dick to Zanny at various times when he's like, you don't understand anything about the world, Zanny, and you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. And things like that made him seem like he has this moral superiority over her. And, he's part of the patriarchy too. He's free in a way that she isn't free to express those opinions and to stand up to people like Regina because he's a man. And even though he talks about how he is, advocating for equality or whatever, presumably that's racial equality in this context. But I'm not sure that he's advocating for gender equality so much.
Well, I mean, I think it's more of break some eggs to get an omelet type thing, because, while I do understand that, the way he was kind of telling her that might not have been the most kind of sensitive. He also, it's very clear. He's like, hey, I had to let you figure this out for yourself because you would have hated me if I told you that. So I do think his intentions are good.
Yeah. I mean, right. I'm sure he will treat her better than Leo certainly would have. And she will be better off with him than she would have been staying with her family. But I don't think I just think I like that there's complexity to him as a character. And I think that is another positive, another thing in the movie's favor. And I mean, Horace is the one character I think who is just purely good.
The dying, yeah. If you're dying, you can be, yeah.
Right. But I mean, he's a good character and he's a fascinating character, but I don't think there's not really much to him where it's like, he's made mistakes or he has these questionable motivations in any way.
Yeah, we never learn how he got all his money or anything.
Right. And anyone who gets that rich in the South in that era has done something. I think it's impossible not to.
Yeah.
So should we talk about the treatment of the Black characters in this film? I mean, it is prominent, and I think it's nuanced in a way in that, yeah, they're always certainly in the position. Every Black character in this film is a servant, but on the other hand, they do get substantial scenes And especially, I think, is it Addie is the character's
Yeah.
name?
Yeah.
You know, who's the maid. She has her moments of being able to kind of stand up. You know, she's obviously spent a lot of time with this family and she understands how terrible they are. And in her own way, she's able to impart that to Birdie and especially to Zanny, like, hey, watch out for this. And so I think that was, even though the character is in that particular position, it gives her more humanity. It gives her more dimension that you would expect from a character like that in most movies of this era.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I mean, look, I mean, obviously this is the Deep South at 1900. So even though, Black people were free at this time, like what work could they really get, right? So like we're not knocking the idea of like, hey, all the servants are Black. This is probably an accurate representation of that and how shitty they were treated by their employers. But I did like, that party scene that you're referencing with Birdie and Zanny and David and Addie, and Horace too, where she's just like telling him like, hey, if you need to scorch the earth to get what you get, like look at what you've left behind and how how you've caused more harm than good there. So I think the attempt was there, and maybe at the time it would have even been seen of like, oh, like this is a progressive way of portraying the Black servant. But now, it feels very like not great.
No, it's not great. And it was interesting to me. There's one scene where we see interactions among the servants and with local kids that doesn't involve any of the white characters. And you see these kids kind of come up to the back entrance and they're asking for food, and the servants are talking to each other about, can we do this? And will Miss Regina be okay with it? And I thought, again, I'm not sure if that's in the play or not, but I thought a movie made now maybe, or even just a different kind of movie, would devote more time to those interactions and how life was for these servants in this wealthy household, and maybe how thematically it was reflective of what the rich characters are doing, scheming against each other. But instead we just get that one scene. But I did appreciate that scene to show that how these characters who work for a rich family can use their relative position of privilege compared to these kids who are coming to beg at the door to help the community, rather than to simply extract as many resources as possible from the community.
Man, see, this is why he's the pro, Dave. I just looked at it as like, give these kids some food, guy. So,
well, there's that.
I mean, there is the other scene, with Horace and everything, and they're all banding together to like kind of help him out, and you see that way more than what the brothers are doing. Like, well, Horace, we could just come back, or like, oh, let us know how he's doing, and you see the humanity is with the group of servants and not with the actual family.
Right, and one thing that is clear that is terrible about the Hubbards is that they made their money by exploiting poor Black people. They started as merchants, and they had really exploitive like terms of loans and tabs and things like that, so that they could keep people in thrall to them and always in debt to them, and build up money at the expense of people who presumably were freed slaves and had to navigate this whole new world and didn't necessarily know how to do that. And they swooped in. Whereas you get the impression that Birdie, even as part of a slave owning family, was somehow more sympathetic. And that's a problematic element. But at the same time, it's clear that even if they didn't own slaves, the Hubbards were enriching themselves on the backs of Black people.
I mean, I would expand that out to say of poor people of all races and creeds, right? Like they just took advantage of anyone and everyone who needed money from the bank, right? So.
Right. Not the bank. I mean, probably that too. And that goes to what has Horace done to make money, because Horace is the one who runs the bank, whereas the Hubbards ran a store. But Birdie specifically says at one point that her mother said the Hubbards, they exploit poor colored people. So yeah. I think it's true. And of course, the thing that they're planning to do, the reason why they can lure that businessman from Chicago to build the mill in their town is because they're going to offer the lowest wages in the region. And presumably that's to whites and Blacks both. And so they're definitely exploiting the poor of all races, all colors and creeds. But I think it's specifically, again, the freed slaves who were open to be exploited at that time that they really took advantage of.
Well, right, because how else could they survive? And
Yeah.
then, the flip side of that is, you have Ben in there and he's like, he's talking about how much they're going to make. So let's just say it's $3 a week. And he's like, I would work for $3 a week. And it's like, you would not, sir. But, whatever.
Right. And the other thing is, I think it's actually $8 a week. And then Horace says, oh, yeah, well, but by the time you're done, they'll be making $3 a week or something like that, right? That's going to be the alleged wage. But of course, the way, fees and, this is the era of things like the company store and, we got to take things out of your paycheck for equipment and for uniforms or whatever, they'll find every loophole that they can to steal from those wages.
Yeah, I mean, they suck. The Hubbards are assholes, Josh. That's my assessment. I don't need a blog and a long post about it.
It wasn't that long. It was a reasonable length post.
Fair enough.
So Jason, I want to get back to what I know you always think of as one of my pet themes and ask you, is Uncle Ben gay?
I don't care one way or the other, obviously. Maybe he
is.
And
but is he meant to be in the film? Is that an aspect of his character?
I didn't think about his sexuality once in the film, maybe he is, or maybe he's a rich guy who's just, banging every broad who will let him at that point, and probably some who wouldn't let him at that point, right?
So. Yeah, that is fair. I did think it was somewhat pointed when they talk about how he never got married and never wanted to get married, and that, being a confirmed bachelor in both 1900 and in 1941 is the way to kind of codedly say that someone is gay. So I don't know if that was an intent or not.
Well, Josh, you and I are both confirmed bachelors. Are we gay?
Maybe that's what we're giving in 1941 code here.
Can you let me know if I'm gay? Because I'm not sure now.
We'll consult on that later.
Dave, am I gay?
I'm not sure. I really don't know.
Jason's having an existential crisis here on this episode.
Yeah, in my mind, all I have is Diana Ross, I'm coming out in my head right now.
All right.
Okay. Well, Dave, I want to ask you, because I know you were not so crazy about this film. Would you feel like what didn't work about it?
Well, and I did like it. I just kept thinking, and maybe it's, you were talking about like the campiness of whatever happened to Baby Jane. And like, I was kind of expecting this to be campier. And so I went in with that kind of, mentality. And then it was a little bit more restrained. And so I liked it. I just didn't love it because I was expecting her to be more evil, and I was expecting them to be more shitty. And they're all shitty people, but they're just not.
She tries to let her husband die by not going to get his medicine. And she's basically killing every relationship she has so she can be the, breadwinner. So what part wasn't evil enough for you?
She could have been more theatrical about it, but but no, I enjoyed the movie though. And you guys already talked about her, but I really liked Addie and like all of her like little glances at them while they're just sitting around being horrible. And you could see her, you were talking about the great staging. You see her like in the background, just like putting a little eyebrow up or something like that. And like, she's great as that, like an audience surrogate or something. Like you're sitting there just like, God, these people suck. And I think she does a great job of kind of portraying that.
Yeah, she does. And I mean, and I think maybe for people who aren't as familiar with Bette Davis or who only know something like Baby Jane, which is one of her most famous films, that you would expect her to always be at that level. And she's known for this campiness. But to me, I think, I was saying this to Jason when we were talking about this the other day, I feel like a modern analog for Bette Davis is Nicolas Cage.
Sure, yeah.
Where people feel the same way. They don't know, if you don't know a ton about Nicolas Cage, you expect him to, he's always at a 10 and he's always doing these crazy over the top performances. But what makes him great is that he's not always doing that.
Definitely.
And he's really good at that, but he can build to that, or he can know when a performance calls for that and when it doesn't. And I think Davis is the same way. There's plenty of movies where she's really big and it's very entertaining, but I think she's just as good at being restrained or knowing when the right moment is to kind of unleash that. And I think if this movie was super campy, it wouldn't have the same devastating effect that it does in those dramatic moments.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's also part of why I was a little bit cooler on it than you guys, is I didn't get the devastating effect. I just like got a interesting movie about some shitty people and the kind of scam that they're running, but like I didn't really get much emotionally out of it though.
So you're saying it would have resonated more for you if they had treated the black people worse?
I was thinking about people in general.
Right.
Okay, I was
Treated-
just making
yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Treated everyone worse.
Yes.
Yeah. Equal offenders there.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So should we rate this then, Jason, out of 5 heart attacks? I don't know.
You're always so dark, Josh. So how
It's
about
a dark
5?
film.
5 foxes.
5 foxes. There's no foxes, no actual foxes
I know.
in this film.
So, yeah.
5 local papers, or
Yeah.
maybe gay guys, or whatever.
Sure.
you want.
Anything you like.
It gets 4 maybe gay guys from me. I could definitely see this in my top 10 first time watches this year. As same with the Maltese Falcon, which I had never seen before. This movie sizzles, bro.
Yeah, I agree. I give it a 4 as well. It is one of my favorite Bette Davis movies. It had been at number 1 on my top 10 films of 1941, and I think I will still leave it there, despite some great films that we also saw this season. And great film. 4 from me. Dave, how do you rate this?
I'm going with 3, but if I ever rewatch it, I might make it a 3.5. We'll see.
All right. We'll appreciate your generosity. That happens. You're going to negotiate like Regina to give us an extra half star.
Sure.
So,
Dave, if Nicolas Cage was in a remake of this, who would you? I mean, I guess it'd have to be Uncle Ben, right? That's who we'd want him to play. Or?
Yeah, I suppose that would work.
But what if he played Regina?
Yeah, I mean, we could.
Or Leo, the weirder characters,
Yeah.
I don't think the dynamics, the dynamics would have to work more of an economic thing if he was playing the Regina character, unless, they really dug into that and he was a trans character.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe he's just playing Regina and we don't even explain why.
He could just yell, "I lost my hand."
We'll come back and talk about the legacy of the Little Foxes. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this season finale of our season on the films of 1941, we are talking about audience choice pick, The Little Foxes. And as we said before, we have talked about director William Wyler in the past in our 1939 season. We talked about Wuthering Heights, and he won multiple Oscars for Best Director for Mrs. Miniver, The Best Years of Our Lives, and Ben-Hur. He worked with Bette Davis. This was the final time, but he previously directed her in Jezebel and The Letter, and was just a major director of this kind of classic Hollywood era.
Yeah, and we know that Teresa Wright won her Oscar the year after for Mrs. Miniver, and also worked on The Best Years of Their Lives. So, we got a little a troupe here, Josh.
Yeah, a lot of collaborations
of our lives, not their lives. So.
Yes. Herbert Marshall also was in The Letter with Bette Davis, directed by William Wyler. And again, these people obviously, they all work very well together. And there's a lot of good William Wyler films, and of course, a lot of good Bette Davis films. But I think that is a special collaboration between the two of them.
Right, like she said, she was his most cherished, or he was her most cherished director. See, I got my pronouns right, guys.
That's good. Way to go.
I'm here for it, Josh. So. No, Wyler, like we said, just the absolute legend. Ben-Hur, kind of the heiress, Roman Holiday. So
yeah,
funny girl. He directed Streisand and Hepburn to their Oscars as well.
Streisand, Hepburn, Bette Davis. That's like
Olivia de Havilland.
Right. He's got the Mount Rushmore of divas going on there.
I like it.
In his career.
Like it. So.
I got to see Ben-Hur in a theater years ago, and that's the way to see that, because it's just so big and overwhelming. Great to see it on a big screen.
Nice. Lillian Hellman, a very famous playwright, romantically linked to our friend Dashiell Hammett, speaking of the Maltese Falcon. But she was also blacklisted for potentially being a communist. Toys in the Attic might be her other most famous play. She did write a prequel to this, but she got into a lot of trouble later on in life because as she moved more into memoirs, people were kept, claiming that her memoirs were a lie, and they seem to have proof of that.
Yeah, she was definitely a polarizing, outspoken figure. You think you hear that she was blacklisted, and that seems sympathetic, but then she maybe was a supporter of Stalin. As you said, the memoirs, she's revealing stuff about her life in Hollywood, but maybe she's making some of it up. So a complex figure. Another Part of the Forest is the name of the prequel to The Little Foxes that she wrote. The Children's Hour and Watch on the Rhine, a couple other famous plays of hers. The Children's Hour made into a film by William Wyler. Watch on the Rhine made into a film starring Bette Davis.
And Another Part of the Forest was a movie in 1948. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it. In fact, I mean, I've seen Watch on the Rhine and The Children's Hour, but I have not seen that. I wonder if that's any good. I'm skeptical of, I assume it's got other actors in these parts playing the younger versions of these characters. And even though it's a play that has been performed with many different casts, I'm not sure how it would work with different actors like that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to watch it and get back to you.
Yeah, I know. I'm curious to see that. Definitely.
Josh, I found that Bette Davis quote where she and Wyler were at loggerheads the whole time. Davis said, "It was the only time in my career that I walked out on a film after the shooting had begun. I was a nervous wreck due to the fact that my favorite and most admired director was fighting me every inch of the way. I just didn't want to continue." And she had to, because she was under contract and they would have sued her. And rumors were Katharine Hepburn was going to replace her.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Bette Davis was a very larger than life figure, and she had a lot of these kinds of conflicts on various films over time. But almost always when you read about that, there's many instances, I'm sure, where I've seen a Bette Davis movie and thought, wow, what a great movie, and she's great in it. And you read some quote from her where she hated doing it, or she tried to get out of it, or she never wanted to watch the movie or whatever. And yet it, she did an amazing job and it's a great film. So that certainly was the case here, that whatever issues she had, it turned out very well.
I have a wonderful memory, and I looked it up on YouTube to make sure I wasn't incorrect, of David Letterman challenging her to a wrestling match on the Late Night with David Letterman. And he's like, "What do you say? We go a little freestyle." And she's like, "Okay, I'll wrestle you." And he pins her. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think later in her career, one thing that she was known for and was great at was being a talk show guest, because she had this huge, larger than life persona. And as we're talking about before, the later part of her career, it shifted into a lot of this campy stuff. She did a lot of TV movies. She played these villains. And so she played that up, I think, in part just because that was the work that she was getting. But I mean, some of those films are great. I think she is maybe underrated as a dramatic actress because people think of her as this campy figure, but she's fantastic as a dramatic actor. Again, I keep mentioning The Letter. Jason, you talked about All About Eve, which is kind of in the middle there between the campiness and the seriousness. The Catered Affair, I think, is another favorite of mine that's underrated, where with her and Ernest Borgnine, where she plays very against type as this working class housewife who's trying to throw the perfect wedding for her daughter, even though they can't afford it. I think I mentioned this when we talked about John Huston in This Our Life, with Davis and Olivia de Havilland that he directed, which is another great one. And I could just go on and on, but I do love Bette Davis.
So look, I know you're the expert, but I don't feel like that she's underrated. I know she's got that larger than life persona, but I think people also recognize, look, she was the first person to get 10 Academy Award nominations and 1 write-in. She's the first woman to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Film Institute. She had 5 nominations in a row. She won 2 for Dangerous and Jezebel. And look at the 5 noms in a row: Dark Victory, The Letter, The Little Foxes, Now Voyager, and something else there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't necessarily mean that she's underrated in general. I just think maybe her dramatic, less showy abilities are underrated, because what people know her for more now are the bigger, broader performances. And a lot of those, I think, films that she was nominated for an Oscar for have become lesser known films versus later ones.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was surprised when I went to look her up that I didn't even really recognize a lot of the films. They're just kind of, there were classics in their time, but I don't know. I haven't even seen or heard of most of these movies.
Right. I mean, and there's a lot, especially during her extremely prolific period in the 30s, that are deservedly forgotten, that are just not very good. But you can see her ability shining through, even when she's in small parts. And I mean, I think it's the same when we talked about Humphrey Bogart, how he had years and years of supporting roles or kind of B-level films before he broke through when he was in his 40s. But you could always see the talent there and the breakout that was going to come when he was in those early roles.
You guys, you got to take the work. And what I mean by that is if you need me as an actor, any of you listeners, I'm here for you right now. I don't care how shitty the part is that you write for me.
Thank you.
I'll fix it.
So going back to another part of the forest, I was looking this up, and an interesting thing is Dan Duryea, who plays Leo in this film. In the prequel, he plays Leo's father, Oscar. So that's a cool bit of casting.
That is. Dan Duryea played against Gary Cooper 3 times in Balls of Fire, Pride of the Yankees, and Along Came Jones. So you got that there, Josh. That's what I got for you on him.
Yeah, he was a big character actor in a lot of film noir and a lot of westerns, through the 1960s. And Too Late for Tears with Lisbeth Scott is a great, great sort of underappreciated noir film that he's very, very good in. So that's my recommendation on the Dan Duryea front.
I like it. We mentioned Teresa Wright won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 1942 for Mrs. Miniver. Josh, of relevance to something coming up, she was in Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt, and Herbert Marshall was in a Hitchcock movie as well. I think Foreign Correspondent and Murder. So maybe it's time we cover a little Hitch on this show, Josh.
Maybe it is. And yeah, Teresa Wright, Shadow of a Doubt, one of my favorite Hitchcock films, and she's great in that with Joseph Cotten, who we talked about in Citizen Kane. Patricia Colling, who was also nominated for an Oscar here, was mainly a stage actor. She was also in Shadow of a Doubt, but mostly was worked on stage and occasionally in film and TV, but had her moment here to be nominated for an Oscar for this performance that she had originated in the play.
Yeah, so I mean, we mentioned Dingle, who was mostly a stage actor. Call Me Madam would probably be the other big film that you might recognize him for. Josh, some other connections. John Marriott, who played Cal. We saw him in Dog Day Afternoon, so that's exciting. Oh, wow. And I think he was the first Black actor he originated the role of Joe Mott in The Iceman Cometh. I think he was the first Black actor to play that part. And I like these little fun ones. We've talked about it a few times this season. Kenny Washington, who played a servant, was the first African-American to sign a contract with the NFL, and he was also in the Jackie Robinson story.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's amazing. You don't think of someone from 1941, and I guess did the NFL exist in 1941?
There was like an NFL and an AFL back there, and just all types of. There was professional football, but it's not what we recognize it as today.
Right. It's like Leatherheads, that George Clooney movie, right? Something like that. That's what I think of.
All right. Well, maybe I'll lend you a book.
Yeah. Jason's the sports guy here.
That's true.
One interesting thing is that unlike the other big plays into films that we talked about this season, Hell's a Poppin' and The Philadelphia Story, which were really kind of confined to those moments, this play is consistently revived every few years through 2024, a big production in London in 2024. And just the list of actresses who have played Regina on stage is quite impressive, including Anne Bancroft, Geraldine Page, Elizabeth Taylor, Stockard Channing, Marg Helgenberger, Laura Linney. Both Elizabeth Taylor and Laura Linney were nominated for Tonys for their performances as Regina.
That is cool. I wanted to mention Perk Westmore, who was of the famed Westmore Hollywood makeup artist family and was the Bette Davis's personal makeup artist. And that's why we got that kind of white powder face on here. Often worked with Lauren Bacall, Bette Davis, Kay Francis. Some movies you might have seen: Casablanca, Rope, and maybe Citizen Kane. Nope, that's not right. Citizen Kane and The Little Foxes were put together on a double bill because they said that this was a failure of a film.
Oh, wow. Well, that's quite a double bill. So
yeah, lots of angst.
Yes, indeed.
Storm and Drang.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I'm not sure how there's an opera version of this film from 1949 called Regina, and it was also adapted for radio and TV in the 40s and 50s. So an enduring
You've never seen
play.
it?
The opera?
Yeah.
No, I don't. It's not a film, so I don't know if there's any way to watch it. But
I got you. Regina, 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 Regina.
Well, I'm glad we got to singing in this episode. I think anything else you want to say about the legacy of this film, Jason?
Great pick from the audience. Always fun to dig into something and learn something. And like I said, Josh, you're the man on this. So it was fun kind of hearing your points of view. And I think you had told me this would be in your top 5 Bette Davis movies. Would you put this in her top 5 performances that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like I'm conflating those two. I mean, I'm not sure if there are that many movies where I would say, oh, she gave a great performance, but it's a bad movie. I mean, there are movies that are bad, but she's good, but it's not necessarily two different things as far as I'm concerned. So yes, I think this is among her greatest performances. I think this is among the best overall movies that she has been in. I would definitely put it up there again, along with The Letter, another William Wyler film, which is right there for me in the top 5 or whatever.
And your underrated gem pick is for her?
I mean, probably The Catered Affair, which I mentioned before, which I have written about somewhat recently. But I kind of went through the favorites there. The Letter, All About Eve, The Catered Affair, The Anniversary, which is a late period campy one where she wears an eye patch and is a horrible matriarch. That's a lot of fun. In This Our Life. And she was good at comedy too. The Rich Are Always With Us is an underrated 1930s comedy that she stars in. And It's Love I'm After is a fun romance with her and Leslie Howard. So that's a lot of Bette Davis movies for people to check out if they want to.
Burnt Offerings looks like one that I would like.
Yeah, that's a later one there, and there's some fun, horror camp later on in her career as well.
Nice.
So that is The Little Foxes, and that is this episode and this season of Awesome Movie Year. You can check us out online and on social media.
We are at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. And because we fight back against rich corruption, you won't find us on X anymore. Suck it, Musk. I'm at Jason Harris Comedy or J Harris Comedy on all the things. Go for Jason on Letterboxd. Come on out to the trivia party or eat this comedy. I post all that stuff on Instagram.
You can find some old stuff from me, including that entire long series of posts about Bette Davis movies at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this film or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think. And check out our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And don't forget about our Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where we post bonus and advanced content for Piecing It Together, an awesome movie year. There's also, this season, we started adding the episodes in advance as soon as they get recorded and edited. So you can check out Awesome Movie Year episodes before they air.
And this is a perfect kind of microcosm or kind of mirror of the By David Rosen Patreon, because Josh and I do backbreaking work and never see a penny.
That's right. That is absolutely right.
Dave is the Regina Hubbard of this whole operation, I guess. So
you know it.
Jason, what's in our next episode?
Epilogue.
That is correct. We will have the wrap-up reflection on this season in our 1941 epilogue. So tune in next time for that.
We'll also announce the next season and talk about a bonus episode we got coming up. So.
Lots of good stuff in that episode. Make sure to check it out. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.